Writing from the soul is the mother of all invention, and 21 Grams is back for another season of this exploration. We will look into the artist and the art they create. Except, this season we're adding the questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, to go even deeper. They say 21 grams is the weight of the soul, and this show is the scale. So now here's your host for 21 grams, Joe Compton. Hello everybody, yes, welcome to another episode of 21 grams. I am Joe Compton, and I have Dennis Myers with me today, so I'm real excited to talk to him about everything science fiction and beyond. And I love exploring world building, so this is going to be a fun conversation. And so, as I always like to do, Dennis, to start things off, I give you the opportunity to tell everybody a little bit more about yourself. So, tell everybody a little bit about you.
All right. Well, I grew up in Minnesota. Spent 10 years in the Navy up and down the East Coast. Did the usual, got married, had 2 kids, got a divorce. More recently, I got out of the Navy many years ago. The 2 kids are in their mid-30s. I'm now a grandfather twice over, and nice. I've been married for the second time for 16 years to May, who is a native of Thailand, and she's one of the most amazing people on the planet. I write science fiction in the far future. I do lean on my Navy history in submarines in my writing, which is why my ship kind of looks like a submarine in space. But a lot of the attitudes and what it's like to be underway, I feel like I do a lot showing the humor and what it's really like to be underway, not just the action scenes where they're shooting and firing and, doing everything professionally, but, just laughing and having fun. Nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think to start the conversation, I think that's interesting. When you think about science fiction, you think about how the genre is so immersed in its, culture and its base, obviously being a lot of it being space oriented oftentimes, but a little bit about, futuristic ideas and it's more idealistic about like the approach of, technology and where it's gone wrong or gone right or, advanced. But at the core of everything, when you're telling a story, you have to have characters, and characters drive those stories. Did you find that's kind of how it started for you? Was the character building kind of where you kind of got into it and then built the world around it?
Yeah. For me, the entire story, especially Final Assembly, the first book, started with a dream of a character. There's a young woman who was coming down a passageway on the moon. So it was going rather high, and I realized that the passageway had to be taller vertically than we're used to, and what that was like, and just thinking about her. And that was like 2006. So she sat in my head for a good 9-10 years before she hit the page. But for me, it's always the characters because they speak to me, and I follow the big events through their eyes. I do have multiple point of view characters, but I've always got at least, that one character who's experiencing what's going on and reacting to it and making decisions.
That's awesome. You were mentioning before we were live too. We were just chatting that you wrote role-playing games before this, and you can tell everybody a little bit about the history. But I'm wondering how much that helped build characters too. Was that something that you found foundationally it was a really good moniker to kind of learn how to build characters?
My experience in the Navy early on, I ended up running the games, and I had a group of players who were always. I early on I would spend hours planning out where I was going to take them. And they would walk in and I would lay out, well, here's this offer here. And they're like, nah, let's go over here. So almost immediately I had to get good at coming up with non-player characters that were different enough to keep the game interesting and creating situations that kept them interested, and then like mapping on the fly, doing things on the fly. How that helped me was when I get into the story, I've got these non-player characters, these non-viewpoint characters. I hear their voices. I know what they're going to say and how they're going to react because I know this personality is different from this one. So, where they butt heads or where they agree, I've got that. In fact, I did all of that before I even started writing the adventures for GDW.
I would imagine too, it helps in the fact that you could throw stuff at them and see what sticks and see how they handle certain situations.
Yeah. Now, if we get into the debate about pantser or plotter, I am a pantser, mainly because I've tried outlining a story, and when I got done with it, I couldn't sit down and write it because I already knew what the story was, and it wasn't any fun anymore. It does cause problems, of course, because sometimes you come up with something, you have to go back and rewrite some things.
Sure.
There was one scene in particular where a character, something happens that reminds her of somebody that died in a previous book. No spoilers, but people die in my books. And she breaks down in tears. And one of the people next to her just goes, "What? She's been shot, beat half to death, and blown up, and this is what knocks her off?" So then I had to go back and write the shooting, the blowing up, and the beating up, because I hadn't actually done that by the time I got to that story, but it was such a great line,
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, then you throw in, you're going into the future. What's something that surprised you about how your world developed that you didn't expect?
I think the part that really stands out to me is, and if I bring this up now, people are like, "Oh no, they would never do that." And it's about the technology that's built into human beings 1,000 years in the future. I make it very simple. There's a display controller that sits in the optic nerve, and basically it's overlays augmented reality, mostly in the form of screens and displays that you can select and interact with. The communications controller connects to the network and handles all the data and auditory so that you can hear things, and they work together. And then there's the medical controller, which if you get your arm cut off, your medical controller is going to handle the nanites that go cut off the blood and save your life without a tourniquet, while also communicating that you need help and bringing in the help. So all of these good things are built into people in this society that I put on Luna 1,000 years in the future. And boy, when I start talking about this stuff to people online now, they're like, "Oh, nobody would ever do that. Oh, blue screen of death, hackers." And to be fair, the main villain of the first novel is a serial killer who has the ability to hack the data streams. So yes, but I kind of look at it like, there are still a lot of people who smoke cigarettes, and we all know that that's bad for you and it'll probably kill you, but people still do it. At this point, in my mind, 1,000 years in the future, you have to have serious hardware, and the serial killer has that serious bit of hardware that helps with the software. He's got that, and he's an exception to the rule. But otherwise, it's fairly safe. I mean, and it's very handy, and everybody's connected, and it's almost a utopian society in that people do what they want, they live the way they want, and as the story goes, you get to understand that the reason they do this is because everybody owns a share of the overall entity, the cooperative that owns everything and runs everything, and they're living off their own profits. and it's like it's recycling with a little bit of input from imports and exports, but everybody's rich. It's not like communism where everything is shared by the government. It's
Mm-hmm.
no, it's a corporation, it's a company, and everybody owns their share. And the way it works is you're born, you get one share. You die, that share evaporates.
Hmm.
So
Interesting. That's
yeah,
kind of cool. I like all those little nuances. And so, is it fun for you to come up with little nuances like that? Are you somebody who likes to say, like they say, the devil's in the details? Are you somebody who really loves the little details and things like is that as somebody who might read science fiction, is that something that you really gravitate toward?
I like doing the details for my own story. And
Uh,
one of the main things that I was doing was Luna is probably the best place to live in the entire universe for a human being at that moment. The Earth suffered a catastrophic war and lost to the global confederation of corporations. So the Earth isn't even a player right now.
mm,
And the corporate federation, everything that Luna is, the corporate federation is not. I mean, everybody has the right to do anything they want on Luna, and in the corporate federation, they have permanent contract employees that are akin to slavery.
mm.
It is it, and I contrast that back and forth, and the series of novels is about this change between these and what comes next.
That's awesome. I, you know, being a pantser, having all these details, and then writing 4 books for this series and continuing in this world for your next adventure. What have you learned about keeping those details? Is there something you do to kind of make sure you have those details oriented? Is there something you figured out? How do you approach that aspect of
I have several Google spreadsheets. I
it?
have at least one uh, document that is nothing but notes for each of the books.
Mm,
I've got one spreadsheet that is the overall spreadsheet for the entire series, where I've been tracking, including what I'm writing now. I'm tracking all of my numbers going back from the beginning of 2018 when I started tracking my numbers, so I can see how much I did every single day. Um, yeah, I have learned. Well, also it helps. I'm a software developer, so
yeah,
keeping track of things, to take notes because you
yeah,
don't
yeah,
remember everything. So
sure.
I take notes. I use the spreadsheet. I've even got a database. There's a couple of tables that I've been using that I may expand on or move to spreadsheets. But during the course of my books, there are probably a dozen or so, maybe 2 dozen different stations in orbit around the Earth that are visited.
Mm,
And I know where each one is, and I know where the orbit they're in, and all the different details. Even though that's not in the book, I have that in the database,
mm,
especially the population. I know how big they are, so that's all there so that I can go back and look at it.
nice. Being, having had had a life in the military, being in the military, and myself also having experienced the military. There's just a certain mentality. There's something about what you gain from that experience, and I lend that to a lot of what I write, especially when it comes to characters and certain aspects.
Mhm.
Like if I was writing a war story or something to that effect, or something where there was a lot of meticulous details and things like that. um, you get that kind of ingrained in you a little bit. Do you and we were talking how this is not truly military science fiction. This is science fiction that leads into a battle per se. So do you find that uh, that discipline, that aspect of your life leaks into the characters you write about, and how mostly would you say it does?
Most of the science fiction that I have read that is military science fiction it seems to miss something that I thought was absolutely key to the military: laughter.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Early on, one of the things that I do in one of my books is there's a junior officer who's just qualified her major watch station, and this is a big deal, and they celebrate it. But then the next junior officer and her, they spend an entire chapter pranking each other, and the fun part for me was every single one of these pranks that they pull on each other, I have personally either seen or know from secondhand source what happened. And they are not the worst ones. They were just the ones that fit in a science fiction space setting. I especially love the last one, which involves underwear and pepper. Not black pepper either. It's yeah. But it's the idea that these are human beings,
Yeah.
and there are things going on. But when something happens and they're at battle stations, all that over familiarity, all that friendship and camaraderie turns into stark professionalism and get the job done. And the way they talk to each other changes up to full-fledged, the IC communications, the all absolutely perfect. And I love playing with that.
Do you have different military organizations within this? Because something else that I love about when I was in the military was that Marines, we interacted with the Navy quite a bit, and we would make fun of one another, and there was like running jokes about who the Marines are dumb and the Navy is soft, things like that. And there's aspects of that. Do you have little nuances like that in there as well?
I didn't manage to get that in. But if you look at the book covers, second cover on is all Marines. All those characters are Marines. You do have Stolen Dreams and Broken Trust out of order.
Sorry.
Broken Trust is the third one, but that's no big deal. And I should mention that Final Assembly, that's the older sister, and Broken Trust and Stolen Dreams, that's the younger sister.
Oh, nice.
They have completely different ways of handling situations.
I bet. That's awesome. I think life would be grim without humor. Obviously, but I do find that is something that when you meet people who write science fiction, or you read a lot of deeper, like hard science fiction and stuff like that, the void of emotion is what a lot of people point to as kind of the thing that turns them off often. So were you kind of conscious of that? Were you? I mean, obviously, it sounds like you were, because you said humor was an important part, the play in this aspect of your writing.
Yeah. Another thing that's influenced me, especially towards the end of the series, when I really started reading Christopher Rocchio's series, The Sun Eater.
Yeah.
He has a lot of emotion in those books, but none of it is pleasant.
Yeah.
And I love Christopher. Christopher is just one of these wonderful people that if you get to talk to him, he's just a really great guy. And he, but man, does he beat his characters all to crap. And I love his books, and I highly recommend them. If you're going to read, one series this year, pick Sun Eater. If you pick two, cut Sun Eater with my books. It's a nice contrast.
Nice. So you were mentioning you have like a naval ship in there, and what other aspects of the military are prevalent in this series that you built into this world?
One of the corporations of the Corporate Federation is called Mercor. And they hold a special place in that they are the only authorized military corporation. And they have two branches, the Marines and the Navy. In the first book, you're introduced to a naval ship and crew. Tong Sianotai is the captain, and he's a viewpoint character, and that's the ship and the ship hijinks. There's a brief cameo of Ted Becker in there. You blink and you'll miss it. And something he does has ramifications at the tail end. you open up the next book and you get into Ted. Ted Becker is the Marine, and you're following him. You go on missions, and by the end of the book, he's involved with the good guys. And you follow his team and the ship. Those two crews are pivotal in the final three books. Basically, it's their story as much as it is Dawn's or any of the other viewpoint characters. One of the things that I do is I have different viewpoint characters in every book.
Mm-hmm.
So you're never quite sure who's going to survive because I kill off viewpoint characters sometimes. But then, like in book 2, the weapons officer on the Pang Yu is a viewpoint character for that one book. In Broken Trust, one of the directors of Allied Industries, which is what Luna becomes, one of them becomes a viewpoint character. Actually, two of them become a joint viewpoint character. We get to follow them on their mission. And so every book has a different flavor, has a different set of viewpoints, and some familiar, some not. So you won't get bored with the same set of characters. You'll be able to follow them through, and hopefully, when one of your favorites dies, you'll have another favorite you can fall back on. Just saying.
It sounds like to me that you've written this in a way that it could technically be standalone because the adventure that happens within that book, and then the framework of whatever the world kind of sprinkles through the rest of it, and then you go into the next book and there's a different adventure, a different following. Is that fair to say, or is it more of
there's multiple storylines?
Mm-hmm.
There are storylines that get resolved within the context of the single book.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's at least one or two storylines that thread through that don't get resolved until the end of Stolen Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
They're hinted at in Final Assembly, and then it comes through and you find out the whole story. It's actually something that's going to be the basis for another set of novels, several hundred years later that I haven't even gotten to yet.
Mm-hmm. So in the context of each of these books, are you on a linear timeline that spans a specific time period, or are you doing this and then 10 years down the road we get into the next book kind of idea? Where do you fall in that aspect of writing science fiction?
These 4 books cover about 2 years.
Okay.
The next book that I'm working on right now starts 5 years after that. And then I've got another story that goes in a different direction that's disconnected from the one I'm working on now, is about 7 years later. So they will be separated by time. I've got a 4,000 year timeline that I have blocks blocked out. There are certain events in the course of the automated empire that occur. And one of them I jokingly refer to as fully automated, which that's going to be fun. But then I've even got, the fall of the automated empire. I already know how that happens and what happens. And then I've got beyond the automated empire, which is after everything just explodes on the galaxy. And
See, Dennis, now I feel like you're cheating a little bit as a pantser here. You've got some designs here. You've got some outlines.
Yeah, like a software developer. You know what the program's supposed to do.
You just don't know how
what the pieces have to do. You just haven't written the pieces yet.
I get you. Which is essentially, for a lot of outliners, that's kind of the case. They usually let the emotion and character dictate a little bit more than they let on. They don't write it completely all the way out. Some of them are really disciplined about that, but I find that I find any type of writing you really there's a good mix of both. I think most of us are planters by nature, just simply because you have an idea of where you want to take something. Maybe it doesn't go that way. Maybe it changes. Maybe the outcome changes. Maybe characters change. Maybe you decide to kill one or keep one alive. But it feels like we're all more of a happy middle ground.
Yeah, let me tell you, I know exactly how that goes. I created two characters
Uh-huh.
who, the two of them, their entire purpose for existing was for them to be killed by the serial killer in the first book.
Mm.
And I got to the scene where I was going to write their death, and I couldn't do it.
Mm.
I liked them too much. They were such a cute couple.
Mm.
And I had the hardest time because the plan was emotionally, for the rest of the story to happen, I needed this to, be a serious thing.
Mm.
It wasn't until I backed up and I thought about one of the two characters, and the question was, well, who is she without him?
Mm.
And suddenly that cracked open an entire backstory that hadn't happened before, and it led me down a path that was central to the rest of the four books that I never saw coming. I am most proud of how that character developed and what happened to her. I don't want to say too much, but she's on the cover of two of the books. I'm just saying.
Yeah, mild spoiler for everybody.
Well, if you
Holly
see the
says,
covers.
"Wow, that's a huge world building feat for 40, the eons and eons that you've created."
Well,
are you exploring a lot of worlds in this timeline as well, or are you centrally staying in one specific spot?
in the first series, they stay mostly in our solar system.
Okay.
The jump drive, which is their
Warp drive
technology that lets them jump long distances.
Yeah.
At the opening of the series, in fact, throughout the entire series, the jump drive, it still takes them like 10 weeks to get to Proxima Centauri. So it's still a very long trip. It is still expensive. It's on the verge of being improved to cut that down to like 2 weeks. But it's just not there yet. And that's part of the fighting, is trying to get a hold of that new technology. So in the first one, Broken Trust does have a major battle around Proximus. Because during the course of events, they discover something on Proximus that changes everything. They find evidence of a civilization that was there 4,000 years ago. But the planet is uninhabitable and always has been. So this must have been a spacefaring civilization that came there. And the promise of the new technology, if they find it on there and all of that, one of the effects, though, is that it gives them a couple of places to go. They find hints as to where they should go to look for other life. And one of the things that happens in the course of the final book is they're sending out ships to go there, but they'll take 7, 8, 9 years to get to these two destinations. See?
Nice. And basically what is happening during those 7 or 9 years is what you're exploring for the most part.
This is the first one is the fight between what was the Corporate Federation and what comes later, which will be called, in the fullness of time, it'll be the Automated Empire.
Gotcha.
Right. The book that I'm working on, that's 7 years in the future, is the First Contact story. What happens when they get there, and when the hero ship shows up to help them.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, for science fiction, there is an expectation, right? And there is and you're writing in our atmosphere, for the most part, atmosphere that would be familiar to human beings in some respects. I mean, it is futuristic. It is at different worlds and things of that nature. How important are you to authenticize that? How much authenticity do you feel like has to be present for you to kind of, go through this world and tell us stories about it?
Well, I don't tell any stories on the Earth itself.
Right.
in this time frame, except for one short story published years ago in an anthology that someday I'm going to work on and expand.
Mm.
But the habitats around in Earth orbit have various different degrees of gravity, and they're either drum stations or rings or cylinders, and there's hundreds of those in Earth orbit and in orbit around Mars and out in the belt. There's even one in Venus orbit. One of the places I visit near the tail end of the story is Venus, the floating city on Venus. That was fun because, not to put too fine a point on it, but the atmosphere on Venus stinks. And I make a big deal out of that too.
And I mean, you dealing with human beings too, so I would imagine there's a lot of things that you authenticize in that aspect as well.
Sure, there are people who are really nice people. There are people who will pretend to be nice, but then stab you in the back. And then there are people who are just jerks, just to be jerks. And sometimes it's hard to tell who your allies are.
Yeah.
Because some of the people that are being jerks might end up being an ally, no matter how much you dislike their personality. So,
my friend of my friend is my enemy. My enemy is my friend. Sometimes, kind of idea, right?
Well, sometimes there are bigger threats.
Yeah.
One of the main antagonists at the very beginning is he's one of the when he's introduced, he's the second most powerful executive at the second most powerful corporation in the corporate federation, and he's tired of all the seconds. He wants to be first. So that's his whole goal, and what he does to try to accomplish that, some of it is, not good, including being the antagonist, for the good guys over on Luna in order to get Luna to join the corporate federation. But he's doing it because he wants to leave a legacy for his grandchildren, So he's not necessarily a bad man, but he's not great.
Yeah.
But then
as villains, right?
Well, as the story goes on, there are bigger threats.
Yeah.
And so, you might see him become a bit of an ally,
Interesting. Throughout this series, we've discovered that there's been a lot of talk of genre. We talked about it on This Week in Indies as well this weekend. Science fiction is one of those genres that has kind of not strictness to it. I mean, unless you're doing like hard science fiction or something that is really minutely subgenre of science fiction. I mean, because obviously there's a lot to play with in science fiction too. There's a lot of room to spread your wings a lot.
Yeah.
And and it sounds like you have a serial killer in the first book, so it sounds like you subvert some form of genre in this as well. Talk a little bit about it staying true to the idea of science fiction, but adding your own flavor to that.
When I first started writing pieces of science fiction, one of the things that I did, and like the very first thing that I wrote with Alan Wold way back 30 years ago, had artificial gravity. As I got older and I read more and I understood more about things like physics, but I understand that artificial gravity ain't a thing. Never will be. So I wanted to write hard science fiction. I also wanted to write first contact stories and multi-species, what happens when this dinosaur-like race meets this underwater squid-like race, it's that kind of thing. So I had to depart from hard science fiction because the time frame. If you read the Sun Eater stories, Chris Rocchio does a great job of having the time factor. It takes forever to get from one place to another, and these people literally have to live hundreds of years, to travel for hundreds of years just to get to two places. But I didn't want to go that route. And my background in Traveler gave me the jump drive. So I didn't lift it exactly because I threw in some twists to my jump drive.
Yeah.
But I use a jump drive which gets around the problem of traveling through space. But that is, as far as I know, that is the one thing that is not physically possible in my stories. And again, it's just the plot device to get people out. I want that first contact story. I want the differences between human beings and aliens, where they're the same and where they're just completely alien and different.
And I would imagine it's also, let's keep it moving kind of idea too. Let's not dwell on 14 chapters about the jump drive, right? Kind of idea.
I hand wave it. In the Navy, I was in weapons, so I don't understand all the inner workings of the reactor. I just know the reactor supplies the power, and I know basically how that works. Yeah. So the characters, they talk about things in general terms, but it's to further the plot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I try not to get too into the technical, because the more technical you get, the more likely it is in 30 years you'll be wrong.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I grew up reading Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov and all of those. And anytime they explained how they did certain things, now that doesn't work, Robert. You can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, there's been running jokes about, Back to the Future, having now those movies made 35 years ago. Now we're in that timeline at the current present time. And it's not exactly, 2010, obviously 2001, it catches up to you. Right. So time doesn't stop, and it doesn't always go the way anybody would imagine it to go. So, you do have to be careful about that. But at the same token, you have to also just let it go, because it's imagination, right? It's part of what drives us to do this.
What I did is I set my stuff so far in the future that I'm not going to be here to hear the complaints. The story that I've written that is closest to our timeline starts in like 2412. That one's out with another publisher that hopefully they'll get back to me eventually. And it's in the same universe, but it's 800 years separated. The final assembly starts in 3288. So
it always fascinated me how much of a genius Roddenberry was for doing something like that, pushing it way out there, right? So
well, he still, they still had the eugenic wars in the 90s, and where's Khan? No Khan.
Yeah.
They've retconned that somewhat.
Yeah.
If you watch the more recent Star Treks, do you watch Strange New Worlds?
I have not yet. No.
Did you like the original Star Trek?
Yeah.
Strange New Worlds is the original Star Trek done with today's technology.
Yeah.
Anson Mount plays a wonderful Pike. Celia Gooding plays a young cadet Uhura.
Nice.
And Rebecca Romaine is there as number one, and she is awesome. And it's episodic, so it's the feel of what it could have been, and they have fun.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. Especially, there's a second season episode where La'an, who is one of the officers on board the Enterprise, gets thrown back in time with a guest character named James T. Kirk. And seeing the two of them interact back in time, that was so good. Heartbreaking and wonderful. I mean, I can't say enough good stuff about it. So if you like Star Trek, give Strange New Worlds a try.
Hey, I love that. I'm fascinated by the aspect of you've completed a series for the most part, right? Obviously, you have intentions to continue through this world and do more stories, and this series will touch other series as it goes along.
Oh yeah.
When you look at that, when you were getting close to finishing it, right? Did you feel something different about where you were? Did you feel like was there something lifted from you? Did you feel a loss? Was there something that you felt when you got to the end of this?
Excitement. I've
Yeah.
done it. I have. This is like the foundational story for what comes next. It's like you want to tell stories in different eras of the Roman Empire,
Mm,
from the rise to the fall.
hmm
This is the story of Julius Caesar to Augustus Caesar.
mm.
This is actually even just slightly before that. The ending political entity is literally the triumvirate. Okay,
Yeah.
this is the beginning of that,
Nice.
and I just want to explore it because um, most galactic empires are either good or evil. I wanted to play with the idea of something good that goes bad slowly. And I want to show that is it good or bad depends on A, who you are, and B, where you are in the timeline and what happens throughout the course of this development, especially in regards to the AI, who is the controlling entity of basically all of humanity throughout. Um, and again, human beings are in control for now. Just saying.
Just throwing it out there. Just keep that in the back of your mind if you read this series.
I called it the automated empire for a reason.
Yeah, it
Just
makes sense. I'm curious what having finished this series does for you for future series. Do you feel what have you taken from this experience that you're going to lend into the next one?
well, one of the things I did is I dropped. I have. Well, for example, remember I mentioned the weapons officer
Yeah,
in book 2 as the viewpoint character.
right.
Well, he ends up marrying into the Onada family, and Skip Onada is a retired commander, and he plays a big part near the end of that book. But him and his family and Jake, Skip Onada ends up being the commander of the ship that is going to the place that is 7 years away.
Hmm.
So Jake goes with them. So we have returning characters that I can evolve in that story in a whole new context.
Hmm.
And the beginning of that book is when the hero ship from the entire series, 7 years later, a new captain, a new crew, they show up. So there's the familiar and the different. I will say that one of the characters that was on the ship in the first book is now a more senior officer aboard. So there's more. There is a connection there. But I've left that open so that I can take other characters and move on with them, and I want to do that with each set of stories and just build it out and keep going forward. I did start a book. I haven't really fleshed out exactly what it needs to do yet, so I haven't worked a whole lot on it. But it's several hundred years in the future on a world called Akashu, which is Japanese for stench. Um, and one of the scenes, they're in a garden and they see this admiral in the garden, and you will recognize the admiral as having been in the first series.
Nice.
But it's just it's a
Yeah.
connection, but it's not vital to the story. It's just
Yeah.
the background. What I want is so that if somebody comes in and they decide they want to start reading one of my series, they can start with that series,
Yeah.
see these things, and then go back and read this series and go, oh, that's her. I remember
Yeah.
that. And know the connections, but it's not necessary to read one before the other.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm aiming for. A
Nice.
series of trilogies, really.
Why now? Why did you pick up this series now? What was it about right now that this series spoke to you and you needed to write it?
I had spent my entire adult life wanting to be an author, knowing how little money authors make, and thinking I'm going to work at my business, at the career, and put aside enough money so that I can stop working and sit down and write a book.
Mm-hmm.
In 2017, I got laid off unexpectedly from a job that I thought I was going to retire at, frankly. And they did a severance. They did an age-based severance. Now, I ain't no spring chicken no more. That was a nice severance.
Yeah.
It literally meant that I didn't even have to go look for a job for 4 months.
Nice.
So I sat down and I thought about it, and I talked it over with my wife, and I said, I have so many unfinished projects. And I did, from building things with wood to the different stories I wanted to write. Like I said, I've got this timeline with all these different stories on it that I wanted to write, and various other projects. And she said I could do whatever I wanted, so bless her. She, my support. I created a database table in my database, and I made a random number function. I weighted each of the things to how much I wanted to do them from 1 to 10. But then I used a random number thing to pull out one at random that I would do. And it pulled out this short story that I had started in 2006 with this girl walking down the hall. And I looked at that on my timeline, which I had recently put together. I looked at it at the timeline and realized that this story was set right near the end of the corporate federation and the beginning of the automated empire. And suddenly I realized, oh, this is my origin story. I sat down and started writing it. And within a few months, I had the first draft, handed that to a professional editor. And she looked over it. She liked what she saw, but then she came back and said, at this point here at about the 60% spot where everybody, all of these storylines are wrapped up and you move everybody, all the characters from the moon to this station in the corporate federation, that's the beginning of the second book. So that's how my first trilogy ended up 4 books. Final Assembly and Precipice are basically A and B. Precipice takes up right after Final Assembly.
Nice.
I did shift a couple of characters that had a little bit more to do in the first book into the second book, and kind of separated things so that they stand alone. Again, that's why Ted only has like that one scene in Final Assembly, just to know that he's there. And Jake, I did have a scene that was told from the weapons officer's point of view in the first book that I switched to be a slightly different scene from the point of view of the captain, who is a viewpoint character. But that's how I ended up started. And then once I got that done, I started hitting the conventions. I started talking to people. I met like Gray Reinhardt and John Hartness, and I met Patrick Dugan and all these different authors. I touched base with an old author friend of mine, Chuck Gannon. Do you read any of Chuck Gannon's stuff? I have
not, but I know who Chuck is. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of his stuff is really, really good. His the Kane Riordan books, the Terror Republic stuff is really good. I enjoy that. Anyway, so I had a lot of feelers out there, and then last year I had one of my bookmarks with me. I made bookmarks with the whole all the titles listed on it, which not approved by a publisher or anything, but here's this prototype bookmark I made. And I met Chris Kennedy, who Chuck Gannon had pointed me towards. And I talked to him, and I asked him, what would it take for me to be able to submit a book? And he says, well, first off, you have to meet me. Hi, we've just met. And then he told me to go ahead and submit the book. So I'm like, and I got that done, put it in, And he came back to me and he said that he liked the book. He's interested in the story, but he's going to need 3 books. So at that point, Broken Trust was about maybe 30,000 words. So it was already started. So I said, okay, I finished it up, got that done. And then when I handed in the 3 books, we signed the contract, and he was going to release them every 5 weeks. So then I asked
he's doing a rapid release for you.
Yeah. And I asked him, what's my deadline for book 4 in order to get it in on the same time frame?
Yeah.
And he gave me a date. And because I have been keeping track of my numbers, I knew what I could do. I knew, what numbers I needed to hit in order to make that target. And yes, I could make that target. And so I sat down and I beat my numbers.
Nice.
I think I had to do like 6,000 a week. I was doing 10,000 a week, easy.
Nice.
And just cranking it out because I knew the story, I knew the pieces, and I knew what had to happen. And so I just churned through the whole thing, and it was fun.
That's awesome. Is that when you built your bookcase when you got laid off?
Actually, no. No, the bookcase I think came a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there. I don't.
For everybody watching, he built what's setting behind him.
Oh yeah, these bookcases with the LED lighting and the trim and yeah, and note the dolphins embedded up here.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about off there are the shelves the shelf you put so that the books can conveniently just be right over your head.
Yep.
Very cool. That's awesome. And Andy says he loves it. All right, you ready to do the questionnaire, sir?
Sure.
All right. So we're about to take Le Questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, and then perfected by the awesome James Lipton for Inside the Actor's Studio, and then taken and stolen by me for the purposes of torturing my guests. So, Mr. Myers, tell me, what is your favorite word to write?
So, during the initial writing process, you just write it out there, and everybody is speaking in your head, and you throw it out there. I generally lose like between 500 and 700 words when I remove "so" and "well."
So that's your favorite word to write is "so" and "well"?
It's apparently, yeah.
So then I'm curious, what is your least favorite word to write?
I don't know. There are a couple that every time I write them, I have to use spell check to get them right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all have those.
Yeah. I tend to stay with language with words that I would actually use myself in a lot of cases, except for certain characters like Elliot, the business guy. He speaks a little bit more educated like. And then there are some characters that, like the dock workers on Endurance Halo, might speak in a little bit more gruff, like, no, you be there now, okay? You do that.
Yeah. Nice. So what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
What turns me on? When I have a good idea or a conversation I know that needs to happen that's going to be funny, that's going to be or heartwarming or touching. Sometimes a good argument where the two people have good arguments, butting heads on a matter of opinion, those are fun. Yeah, those are my favorite.
What turns you off?
Set descriptions.
Not a big info dumper.
My first drafts are largely talking heads in a white room. I have to go back and I have to add in the furniture later. And I have found that doing that also helps me, because I'm thinking about just the scenery. There's one case in particular where I had the argument and I knew the feelings, but it was an okay scene.
Mm-hmm.
And when the character that's the viewpoint character leaves, I knew that this other character was hiding a great deal of anger and frustration, but it really hadn't come out until I gave her a glass table. Then as he's walking away, he hears the table get smashed. So once I add in the furniture, I can amp up and do certain things that way. But yeah, scenery is something that I always have to add in later.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mr. Navy Man, what is your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
It's okay. You can say it. I asked the question, so it's fine.
Well, honestly, shit. Because shit is the most versatile word in the universe. There's good shit, bad shit, smelly shit. There's so much shit you can get into. It's good shit too. It's also one of the first words that my daughter used correctly. Little toddler girl, she's like, shit.
And it's a funny word, so that doesn't surprise me. It's one of those words that you use a lot of context in when you're telling a joke or being funny.
Oh yeah. There's one scene in particular in the book where the Marine character and what is supposed to be a subordinate Marine who's a female, they have a scene in which he's checking out her leg because she was injured, and during the course of events he tickled her foot. And it was just kind of a mutual laughter. And then as she's leaving, she looks up at him and he looks at her. And after she's gone, he realizes he's still thinking about her eyes. And he just goes, oh, shit. And you know what that is.
Yeah. All right. So what sound or noise do you love?
Sound or noise? I love music, hard rock. I am a hard rock fan. If anybody is out there who recognizes the ladies in this picture here, you will know who my favorite band is because they're there. Their names are scattered throughout my books as well.
Ooh, nice.
Just saying.
Nice.
I do like hard rock, and I do not necessarily need to understand the lyrics.
All right. What sound or noise do you dislike?
The constant ringing in my ears. Little known fact, I have tinnitus, which is the ringing in my ears that never goes away.
Oh, man, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
I've had it for decades. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it gets louder and louder.
Yeah.
I used to go to a lot of movies. I can't do that anymore because movies have just gotten too loud.
Yeah.
And every time I go, the effect is that the volume is amped up.
Yeah. I can't imagine you watching commercials because I was just experiencing that today where I was watching a show and I had it on the perfect volume and then the commercial comes on and it just ruined the volume. And I was like, what the hell? Why do they have to be so loud?
YouTube has recently upped the volume of its ads.
Yeah.
Drives me nuts.
Yeah, there's some threads about that and complaints from creators about that for sure. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So what character of yours would put their face on the currency of their world?
Well, Dawn is going to have her face on the emblem of the entire empire. Her symbol will go down in history. That winged woman is the symbol that they're going to live with for eternity. So that Dawn, and she didn't like it at all.
Oh.
But she has friends who go, yeah, no, that works.
What artistry would you love to try and do that you haven't tried before?
I have a lot of artists in my family, painting, art.
Oh, nice.
I did want to try that. In fact, that was one of the projects that was in my database was to finish up these. I have 4 panels that I did go to the point of painting them black because I wanted to do a Starfield type thing.
And
I got to the point where that was an unfinished project that needed to be done. It's still unfinished, but that is something that I'd like to try my hand at.
Nice.
I I guess as a backup to that, I would throw video editing and actually host a show like you're doing, because you're doing an excellent job.
Oh, thank you. What artistry will you never try?
Ooh, dancing. Dancing. I will never be a professional dancer. No.
That one's coming up a lot. I'm finding we're an uncoordinated bunch over here.
Yeah, that, and after you get beyond a certain age, your knees just go,
that too.
no.
Yeah, things creak and twist that you don't expect them to, right? Yeah. All right. So the last question is: if heaven exists, or whatever you believe in exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive?
If I die and I go to heaven and there's a God, I fully expect him to go, "Ha! Gotcha!"
Absolutely. That's very apropos for the conversation that we've had today, sir. You know, I really appreciate the opportunity to sit here and talk to you about all the things that you're doing and what you've been doing and how you've been doing them. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me and do this with me. I really do appreciate the conversation.
Well, I appreciate it too. And the only thing I wanted to throw out there is that in April at RavenCon, opening ceremonies of RavenCon, they're going to announce the winner of the Webster Award for 2023. And Final Assembly, my first book, is one of the finalists.
Oh, good luck.
I can't say whether or not it's going to win because I'm up against some really good competition.
Sure.
But fingers crossed.
Very nice. Where can people find these lovely books of yours? Tell everybody where they can get them.
They're available on Amazon.com in both Kindle. They're in Kindle Unlimited, so you can check them out if that's your deal. If you can order them as paperback from Amazon as well. You can find me in somewhat of a blog and sign up for my newsletter at automatedempire.com. And if you want to know anything about my life, I do a monthly newsletter that I put things in there about my grandsons because, oh my God, I'm a grandfather twice over. And my daughter and my son and, my wife. So there are family pictures. There are, different things going on and updates on my writing and the projects that I'm working on, including both of the series that I'm working on and what I call my special project, which let's just say it's the crappiest book you've ever heard of. May never get published. But
all right. Well, now you almost have to, because that's too good of a teaser there.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining us on 21 Grams as always, and we'll have another one for you next week. And thank you so much to Dennis and to all the audience. And remember that it's always time to go and eat now. We'll see you again soon, everybody. Take care.